And we might mention that, as you all know, today is Mother's Day, and there is no way one day is enough to adequately, or even begin to adequately, or even scratch the surface of what mothers do for their families and all of that. But we hope that you feel honored today and know that you're special. And I think Grady's sermon is related to that this morning, so he'll have more to say about that. But happy Mother's Day, and I hope you enjoy the day and are treated with the royalty and being special that you deserve. Isaiah. Back to Isaiah. We've been in Isaiah for quite some time now because it's a long book and there's so much in there to talk about. Last week we started here with verse 7. The assurance of the deliverer. And again, the titles that we're using for this come from Don Shackelford's commentary. And the text is from the New Living Translation. So read differently probably from the standard translations we normally use, but I like the way it translates most things in Isaiah and most things in the Old Testament, not so much New Testament, but Old Testament. It seems to capture the spirit of it pretty well. But last week we talked about how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the messengers who bring good news, the good news of peace and salvation. And we pointed out that that sounds remarkably like Romans chapter 10 and verse 15, which says the same thing in the New Testament context. How beautiful are the feet of those people who, in essence, preach the gospel. And so the message here, again in Isaiah's day, was how beautiful are the feet who were telling the Israelites, here's what you need to be doing. And what was Israel's response? Don't tell us that. We don't want to hear it. We don't care. We don't have anything to do with you. And they persecuted the prophets and all of that. But from God's perspective, how beautiful are those people who do that, and maybe even more so in times when people don't listen and refuse to listen, refuse to have anything to do with the message that's coming from God. Also, Nahum chapter 1 verse 15 is another similar statement to that particular idea. What is the good news? That the God of Israel reigns. He reigns. And that for Israel was something they had forgotten or ignored or just didn't think about anymore, because they were worshiping the Baals, the Asherahs. You picked the god that they had found and they worshipped it on a hill somewhere. And they were doing all of that idolatry when God had told them, I'm the only one you're to worship. I'm the only one to follow. But the messenger here is preaching the good news that Israel, the God of Israel, reigns. He's still there. He's still in charge. He hasn't gone anywhere in all these years that you people have just gradually moved further and further away from Him. And so the implied message of that is, if God's here and hasn't moved, and I'm here and I've moved, what should I do? I need to travel. We call that repentance in a biblical context. I need to get back to where I'm supposed to be, and that's with God. And that's what Isaiah's message has been from the very beginning of this book, and will be to the very end of this book. It's the same message that Jeremiah preached. It's the same message all of the prophets of the Old Testament preached. And ultimately, it's the same message that was preached in the New Testament by the apostles and those who were Christians. We've got to be in that relationship with God. And now, today, the only way to get there is through Jesus Christ. And of course, Isaiah, being the Messianic prophet, is telling us about Jesus. And we're going to talk more about that as we get there. Just real quickly through the rest of that paragraph. The watchmen shout and sing with joy, for before their very eyes they see the Lord returning to Jerusalem. And again, we're talking about Babylonian captivity 200 years before it happened. Isaiah's prophesying, and he's already prophesying not just the captivity itself, but the end of the captivity. And we've said several times he's talking about it as though it's already happened, because in truth it has. It's not something that's going to happen and, well, maybe this will be the outcome. This will be the outcome. And he's saying here, the watchmen sing for joy because they've seen not just Israel return, we've seen the Lord return to Jerusalem. And that's the significant thing of his message there. Let the ruins of Jerusalem break into joyful song, for the Lord has comforted his people. He's redeemed Jerusalem. And the Lord has demonstrated his holy power before the eyes of all nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the victory of our God. Again, it's already a done deal. This is what's going to happen. Jerusalem, the ruins of Jerusalem, because that's what they'll be when Israel comes back, they will sing, break into joyful song, for the Lord has comforted his people, has redeemed Jerusalem, and demonstrated his power before all the nations. God has, in essence, been God. And people are going to come back after this captivity and realize that and acknowledge him for who he is. And all of the ends of the earth will see the victory of our God. In the end, God wins. You look at the book of Revelation in the New Testament. And how many of you fully understand the book of of Revelation in the New Testament? Wait a minute. It's hard, isn't it? I mean, we got a general grasp of it, general understanding of it, and we can work through it. But I've heard the saying, and I think it's right, if you want to know what Revelation is all about, here it is. God wins. That's it. That's the end result of every book of the Bible, but especially that last one. In the end, God wins. And it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world, God will win. And by extension, his people will win. And again, those last two chapters in the book of Revelation about heaven and the New Jerusalem give us a sight of that. But again, that's what Isaiah is saying here. All the ends of the earth will see the victory of our God. You'll see it in the return from Babylon. And I don't know if Isaiah has this in mind or not, but he'll see it eventually with Jesus. Because that's going to be the ultimate expression of God's victory is Jesus. So new territory. We haven't been here yet. Verse 11. Get out and leave your captivity, where everything you touch is unclean. Get out of there and purify yourselves, you who carry home the sacred objects of the Lord. You will not leave in a hurry, running for your lives, for the Lord will go ahead of you. Yes, the Lord God of Israel will protect you from behind. Get out of your captivity. We talked about this last week in a little bit of a similar sense, because God told them to remove the chains of their captivity. And we were thinking about that last week in the idea that we doubt very much that when Cyrus sent Israel home, he sent them home in chains like they were brought into Babylon. Likely they didn't have that. So what was God trying to say? What's Isaiah trying to say through this? Get out of your captivity. Maybe get it out of your head. You guys have been captive for 70 years. That's changed you. That's altered you. That's made you think differently. You've become used to being in captivity. You've become used to being a servant and being a slave. You need to get all that out of your head now. Leave that captivity behind. And notice what it says there, where everything you touch is unclean. That's not where God is. And therefore everything there is polluted. Leave all that behind. And probably, just guessing, some of that has to do with maybe the religious influence that the Babylonians had over the Israelites while they were there. You couldn't help but live with those people for 70 years and watch them practice their religion without it influencing you in some way. And maybe they were even forced to participate in that in some way. And so when you come out of get out of the captivity, not just get out. They're going to get out physically. God's going to take care of that. Cyrus is going to take care of that. But get out of that get it out of your head. Get it out of your mind and purify yourselves. Now, he doesn't say how to purify themselves. We don't know what that exactly means as far as what the actual process is. But basically, purifying yourself means putting off what? The filth, the dirt, the sin. Again, back to that term repentance, isn't it? Get rid of all that stuff that maybe has kept you separated from God. And the reason is, especially he's talking to those, you who carry home the sacred objects of the Lord. When Nebuchadnezzar took the temple, what did he do with all that precious gold and silver and the cups and the bowls and the plates and the candelabras and all that? What did he do with that? He took it back with him and put it in his treasury. And you remember, there was one particular king who one night in a drunken stupor said, let's get all those pretty cups from the temple in Jerusalem, let's bring them out, let's drink out of them. That's Kevin's paraphrase. It doesn't say it that way. And so they did. And you remember that's the night when the hand came out and wrote on the wall, the mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. You've been found weighed in the balance and found wanting. And that night the kingdom was overthrown because of his evilness and all of that. So again, all of that stuff, not only did Cyrus send them back and help fund that, but everything they had taken and put in his treasury, he gave it back to Israel and sent them home with it. Again, Isaiah said that's going to happen 200 years before Cyrus was ever born. And it happened exactly like they said it would. Now, was the Ark of the Covenant there at that point in time? No idea. If you believe the Indiana Jones movie, it's somewhere in a government warehouse somewhere. But we don't know what happened to it. Could it have still been there? Sure. Lost in later times? We just don't know. And what implements of the temple came back, what went, all of that, we have no idea. How important is that to us? Makes absolutely no difference in the world, does it? Because all of those were the accoutrements of a law that was nailed to the cross. Something we don't have to worry about. And we say in our minds, well, it would be really nice if we had those things to prove that that really happened. And yet what do we as humans tend to do with items that prove something happened? We make an idol out of it, don't we? And so we worship it and revere it as though the object itself is something important rather than the God who is represented by that. So maybe that's part of the thing, and that's just a side note. I got off chasing a rabbit, and we'll move on. Israel, you will not leave in a hurry. It's not going to be like Exodus from Egypt, where that night you painted the blood on the doorposts of your house, and the next morning you got up and you took off and you left. You ate your Passover meal with your shoes on, with your coat on, everything ready to go, so that at the right time you're out of there. It's not going to be that way this time. It's not going to have to run. You're not going to have to worry about Pharaoh or Cyrus coming after you. You notice it says there, will protect you from behind. Well, he did that with Egypt, with the Egyptians too. Israel just didn't appreciate that. They thought they were going to die. So they left Egypt. They went out. God protected them from behind. The cloud and the fire stood between them and Pharaoh's army. And then Pharaoh's army was destroyed in the Red Sea. What's going to happen here is it's going to be a stately, orderly, visible exodus. You're going to leave. You're going to be carrying all the stuff that you have that was important to you, and you're going to take it with you, and you're not going to leave in a hurry. You're not going to run for your lives, because all of this has been approved of by Cyrus. And you're going to go home with dignity and with respect. And again, the whole message that Isaiah has been trying to present, first of all, his message has been we can avoid that if you'll come back to God now, which they didn't. But once you've suffered this, and again, last week we talked about the idea there that God, well, last slide said God redeemed Israel. Remember, he talked about, I'm not going to have to pay for you. Cyrus is going to do that. Cyrus is going to send you. I'm not going to have to pay for you because I didn't sell you. King James version of that last phrase said, you sold yourselves because of your sin. And so they're redeemed. They're going home. God has taken care of his people again. And the message should be for all of us that when you're striving to do what God wants you to do, when you're trying to walk in the light as he is in the light, as John says, God is taking care of us. And we have to appreciate that and have to understand that. The success of the servant. See, my servant will prosper. He will be highly exalted. And again, when we're talking about the servant, who is it likely we're talking about? Jesus. Yeah. So again, that messianic prophecy sprinkled throughout the book here, right here in chapter 52 and chapter 53 gets really intense. How many times do some of our gentlemen who get up here in the pulpit before the Lord's Supper read from Isaiah 53 and talking about, because Isaiah 53 is foreshadowing and telling what's going to happen with the coming of Jesus. My servant will prosper. He will be highly exalted. And Philippians chapter 2 and verse 9 says that very thing in the New Testament. But many were amazed when they saw him. His face was so disfigured he seemed hardly human, and from his appearance one would scarcely know he was a man. And he will startle many nations. Kings will stand speechless in his presence, for they will see what they had not been told, and they will understand what they had not heard about. And again, there's a reference for that in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 2, if you want to cross-reference that at some point after class. He's going to be highly exalted. And we know that he is. Exalted above all other humans who've ever walked the face of the planet, because he was the Savior. He was God's Son. So he's highly exalted. But then there's that description of his appearance. And I think that's given commentators, scholars, a little trouble figuring out exactly what that means. And I'm going to tell you, I have trouble with what that means. I have an opinion, which I'll share with you, and you feel free to have your own opinion about that. Some people look at that and say, well, Jesus was not a pretty human being, that he was ugly. And there was nothing about his physical appearance that drew people to him. In fact, it was just the other way, that maybe somewhat it was repelling and repulsive to what he was seeing there. And they'll use this passage to say that, well, he didn't even hardly look human. Now, again, you've seen pictures of Jesus, haven't you? Done by the original artist who saw him. It's funny that he's a white European man, that likely was not. But anyway, you've seen the pictures of what people think of. And he's always a good-looking guy. Always smooth skin, always perfect hair, always clean clothes. Just, everything good and perfect about him. And we understand that in some ways that's the way we want to look upon him. But at the same time, reading this, are we looking at him as just the opposite of that? And here's the point I'm getting to. Is Isaiah talking about his appearance every day of his life? Or does that sound like his appearance at one very specific point in his life? After he was arrested, what happened to him? Put a crown of thorns on his head. They scourged him. And we won't go into detail with that this morning. We have younger ones in the auditorium this morning. But you've read before what that scourging entailed. And it was brutal, and it was ugly, and it was nasty, and it was... Sometimes we're told that the person being scourged didn't even survive that to get to the cross to be crucified. So that's how bad it was. And so could it be, and this is where I'm throwing out my opinion, and you feel free to differ with me or say, okay, maybe so, or whatever. But I can't help but wonder if that's not what the point is that Isaiah is talking about here. Maybe. This is when Jesus became to the point where he wasn't even recognized perhaps as human for the things he suffered on the cross. So what does that do for me? Well, if that's true, and certainly what he suffered was horrible, how much more appreciative should I be of what he had to do to ensure that my sins could be forgiven? That's where I think the rubber meets the road. That he literally was hurt and beaten so badly, he didn't even look human anymore. Steve?
In verses 15 and following, it seems to also suggest that Jesus was unrecognizable as far as who he was, the Messiah. And they just, that we saw that throughout his life when he was on earth.
Yeah, verse 15 talks about many nations, kings will stand speechless in his presence because they didn't recognize him. And again, Jesus was the Messiah, the anointed one, the coming one, the servant, as Isaiah calls him. And what had the Jews, the Hebrew people, and maybe other people who knew a little bit about it, what had they built that person up to be?
Serious king.
A serious king, a warrior. I mean, as far as the Jews of that day were concerned, this king is going to come in and he's going to run these Romans all the way back to Rome. And we're going to be free again, and we're going to see Israel prosper like the days of David and Solomon and all of that. And that's in their mind what they had, and yet here he is hanging on a cross, hardly looking human. That's not who we thought was coming. But God had said, this is what you need, not what you've wanted. Yes, sir.
I hate to jump ahead a little bit.
That's all right.
I do think it brings context to this conversation. Like the next chapter, verse 2, it does say that he did not have any beauty that was desired. I do think it is literal, but also that he just was not beautiful man. He was maybe something that we might call a name in our society today. He might have looked just that unappealing. I think there's some context to that as well.
Okay.
Name that is to us.
Yeah, we get to the next chapter, and it says that in a different context than that. And so I think we've got a good point here in that Jesus, again, perhaps, wasn't the most handsome man that ever lived. I mean, but again, if I was picking a Messiah, if I was going to build him from the toenails up, what would I make him look like?
What we grow up looking at.
Exactly. I mean, he would be ripped. He would have, pick whatever color hair you want, smooth skin, kind eyes, stern face that could be nice when it, I could make all sorts of things and it would just be the absolute perfect human being. And what does God think about things like that? It just doesn't matter, does it? It's not the physical presence that was important. Jim, you got a comment?
Well, I was just thinking when Saul became a king, he was taller than him. There was some things about him that kind of put him above, others. But anyway.
Yeah, Jim says Saul was one of those kings who kind of fit this mold. What kind of king did he turn out to be? Yeah, he wasn't that good, was he? Diana.
I just wanted to add to what he was saying. God presented Saul to the people because he knew that their idea of a king looked like some image. He was actually taller than them. He was built different than them. He was handsome. He seemed to be powerful. So he knew what they were looking for. So he presented Saul. He said, but he's gonna break you guys down. He's gonna take everything you have. He's gonna make you slaves. He's gonna do all these things to you. But they still were looking at this image of what they thought they wanted. So I would suppose that if Saul looked that way, and that's what the people were looking for, you would think that your Messiah will look even more so then. And maybe that's why this is the image that they did not recognize.
Yeah, Diana makes the good point. With Saul, Israel already said, we want a king, and they kind of had figured out this is what kind of king we want. And so that's what God gave them in Saul. Didn't give them the kind of king they needed, but he gave them the kind of king they wanted. And then once he said, you get this, here's what he's going to do to you. Taxes. Take your sons. Take your daughters. All this stuff that he's going to do to you. And they said, okay, we'll deal with that. As long as we have the right kind of, as long as we have the poster boy king, it's going to be all right. And that's what they wanted, and they suffered consequences. Kate?
I just wondered, I can see another reason why he would have been an attractive person. I mean, if you want someone to hear your message and follow you truly, you don't want an exterior that makes all kinds of people just attracted to him, who really aren't hearing what he's saying and really will fall away as soon as things change.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say, Kate, is if you got that perfect appearance, that may be what draws you to them rather than the message and the actions. And so perhaps that's why Jesus maybe wasn't the most handsome person that ever walked the face of the earth, because let's listen to his message. Forget what he looks like, because none of that's important as far as God's concerned. Elwin, you had a comment.
Yeah, that's the point that I wanted to make, was you look at all the people that followed him, his apostles, the people that served him, you know, love has no fear. And they realized right off the bat, they recognized the Messiah. Even when Jesus asked him, Peter, who am I? And they saw the miracles and all these things. It was like, you know, I guess all of us in our lives have known people that are not really, you could say, socially acceptable because of how they look or how they act or some strange things that they do. And this is one of the things that Jesus looked at, was the fact that most of the people that he benefited were those that were not great and famous and educated and smart. It was all the people that were suffering, that were ill, that needed healing, that needed someone to lead them. And the whole world turned to him. So in my eyes, it's just like anyone we meet on the street, whether they're homeless or whatever their situation, we need to love them like Christ would have loved them.
Yep. Ellen makes the excellent point that the people that Jesus went to weren't those perfect Hollywood stars, if you will, and starlets. I mean, that's kind of how we judge society, isn't it? The most beautiful people. They're the ones we see in the movies and all of that, and maybe physically they are whatever the current fashion of beauty is supposed to be. Their lives, on the other hand, are kind of completely opposite of that, but that's beside the point. But Jesus went to the poor, the downtrodden, the outcast, the blind, the lame, the mute, the lepers, the diseased. He went to people who probably didn't care what he looked like, but cared that he was there to begin with. When that leper came up to Jesus asking to be healed in the book of Mark, and Jesus reached out and touched him, were you supposed to touch a leper? Were you supposed to be near a leper? Wonder how long it had been since that leper had any human contact besides other lepers. And yet Jesus reached out and touched him. I don't think that leper cared what Jesus looked like at that point in time. He cared the fact that he touched him, loved him, healed him, and probably made a follower for life. Flo?
Well, except for man's rendition of what Jesus looked like. We don't really know what he is.
No idea.
But we got to remember he's still God. Jesus could have been all those things. Good looking, not good looking, built, not built, all those things. And when he went to the cross and he was challenged, since you're the Son of God, save yourself, he didn't exercise his power. And that's the difference between Jesus and man. He didn't exercise his power. I mean, he could have been anything. He could have looked like anything. It doesn't really matter. But we don't know for sure what he looked like. But the important thing is Jesus did not exercise his power. At the time he needed to. He could have.
Could have, yeah. Flo makes the excellent point that Jesus could have been any of those things. We're just speculating here because we don't know. But there on the cross, he could have exercised his power. The power that he acknowledged he had. I can call legions of angels right now. And what did he do? He didn't. He could have exercised that power because he was God in the flesh, but he didn't, because he had a greater concern, and that was saving humanity from sin. And he allowed himself to die on the cross, gave up his life literally, so that we could have that salvation. And again, Isaiah is talking about this from way, way in the past before it ever happened. Who has believed our message? And again, that's quoted in or mentioned again in John 12:38, Romans 10, and verse 16. To whom has the Lord revealed his powerful arm? My servant grew up in the Lord's presence like a tender green shoot, like a root in dry ground. There was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance. There it is again. Nothing to attract us to him. He was despised and rejected. And we know that again, John 1, verses 10 through 11, John 7 and verse 5, Mark 14 and verse 50. A man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we did not care. So again, the picture of this coming Messiah in everybody's mind was he rides into town on a white horse. Not a donkey. Rides into town on a white horse. He's strong, he's powerful, he's beautiful. He is everything we expected him to be. And yet again, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. We have this picture of servitude and humility and of anything but what we would expect this Messiah to be, except for the fact that that's exactly what kind of Messiah we needed. He grew up in the Lord's presence. Nothing about him that just blew us away. He ended up being despised. He ended up being rejected. He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with deep grief, and because of that, it seems like Isaiah is implying we turned our back on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we didn't care. Again, speaking perhaps to Israel at the time when this was taking place, you saw him, you didn't like what you saw, and you turned your back on him, and you didn't care what he was saying to your detriment. Again, everything we're talking about Jesus here, we set the stage for this. Stage for this was set all the way back in Genesis 12 with the promise made to Abraham. In you, all nations of the earth would be blessed. We know that was coming. So all of that's taking place, and all of this comes about, and it's going to be different than what we expect. Because it's not a physical coming that has physical consequences. It does, we understand that, but it's a spiritual coming for spiritual consequences. For things about my salvation and my soul that have nothing to do with my physical stuff. Because this is temporary. And so the appearance, what he looked like, what he was like, all of that, nothing like what I would expect or what I would plan if I was put in charge of making the Messiah. Elwin?
It's interesting that Paul went through the same thing. He talked about he wasn't a great speaker.
Mm-hmm.
He had a problem. He said that he was appreciative of the fact that the people accepted the problem that he had.
Mm-hmm.
In his eyes or whatever it was that they were putting up with it. A lot of people, they heard him preach, but then they wanted to believe somebody else. He was always persecuted by the Jews just like Jesus was. So I see when Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Is that not what we can expect of each one of us?
Absolutely. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. Not because of this, but because of what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier about him riding in on a donkey. Recently, I heard some commentary about when Jesus rode in on a donkey, and you look at what a donkey was to God, it was an animal that was it would protect the burden of its owner. It was a burden bearer animal. And then when you look in the Revelations, it talks about the horse that Jesus is going to come back on. And when you look in the Old Testament, even God talks about his horse. You know, it's an animal for war. It has no fear. It's going straight in. It knows what its job is to do, and that is to destroy. And that is how Jesus is going to return. And I think it's just like in his flesh, he bore our burdens. You know, he bore our burdens on the cross. But when he comes back, the war will be won on the horse.
Yeah. I like that analogy. We've got a donkey. It's a beast of burden. It is a, shall we say, a common farm animal that's used for whatever purpose that it is. But when Jesus comes back, again, back to the book of Revelation, he's not coming back on a donkey, is he? Because he will come back victorious. Why? Because of what we're talking about now, his death, burial, and resurrection on the cross. That's when he will come back, and nobody will stand before him. Because he will be maybe more of that Messiah that we expected the first time, because he has done what he needed to do to save humanity. And again, it's amazing how Isaiah, at this point in time in history, 200 years before the captivity, so long ago, and we're using his ideas to talk about things that are yet to come. And how amazing is that? How deep are the things that he had to say? And it goes on to talk about in verse 4, it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And again, a couple of references, cross references there, Matthew 8 and 1 Peter chapter 2. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. In other words, he died on the cross because it was his fault somehow. He was punished because he was doing wrong. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins, beaten so that we could be whole, whipped so that we could be healed. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's path to follow our own, and yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. That's an important paragraph. And because we got 2 minutes left in class, let's don't start it. We'll plan to start there next week so we can spend some time on all of those things. Thanks for your participation this morning. Appreciate it.